So let's start, Robert, with Zappos and your first day with that organization. Maybe you weren't an employee yet; you were just introduced to the company. But take us back to that first day at Zappos, what it was like, and what you were thinking.
Yeah, well, my first experience there was really going at first as a marketer of the book Tribal Leadership, and Dave Logan, a guy I went to coaching school with, wrote it, and I was marketing it. Got it to Tony, he loved it, and we went there, and it was just an instant wow. Everything was so fun. It's like going to the set of Romper Room or something. It was a blast, and we were invited to the happy hour after meeting their executives and talking to them, and they said, do you want to go walk the halls and talk to anybody while we're waiting? And we couldn't believe it because we were essentially the press, and they were saying, talk to anybody, they're allowed to be on the record. And that's when we knew, 1,500 people who are all brand ambassadors. And then went to a happy hour that night that made most weddings I've been to look boring compared to Zappos happy hour. And that's when I started talking to Tony about his ideas for Zappos Insights, actually productizing the culture. And we got into a lot of conversations about it. I eventually wrote a proposal and came in at first as a consultant to launch a video site all about culture. And what's interesting about that was it really failed at first because nobody was buying it. They didn't want all these videos we thought they would at a monthly price. But then what we did was we shifted it up to events and actually recorded an event thinking that we would be using that recording as the content. But people loved the experience so much of being there that we changed the whole business model to experiences. And that's when it really started to take off. And the experience of being there, I would accidentally call it school all the time because it felt like being at college constantly. And people would come through on tours, thousands come through a month, and seeing people with their eyes wide open saying, wow, every day you're there helps you really appreciate the environment. And it was just an amazing place to be where everybody there is of service to each other. And so the vibe there is just incredible.
You describe a lot of that right in the opening pages of your book. It's really interesting to read about. I'm wondering now that it's been quite a few years since that initial experience. Well, I guess let me ask this first. So was culture on your radar at all when you went there? I mean, were you thinking, was culture something that was a priority for you as you went to Zappos?
It was, in the sense of I just graduated with Dave Logan from Georgetown's leadership coaching program. And it's all about organizational coaching because it came out of the OD school there at Georgetown. They found that if you don't really shift the leader, the organization doesn't change. And so I through going to that program and advising businesses in the incubator that I was developing with friends, I got the sense of culture and how powerful it could be. And I could not get a job in culture for the life of me. I had just graduated. I talked to all these OD firms, couldn't even get an interview. And I knew I wanted to be involved in that capacity. And when Dave gave me the chance to market the book, we got it to the bestsellers, had all kinds of great publicity on it, including at Zappos. Zappos actually sponsored the audiobook. And when I heard Tony's idea that he wanted to productize culture, it just lit me up inside of everything I wanted to do, working with a great brand, working in culture, productizing, developing a business as an entrepreneur. I just had that green light inside for me that this is what I want to be doing.
So when you talk about culture, it's so interesting. One of the first chapters in your book is once you get past the story that you just kind of shared here in greater detail in the book, then you define culture, right? And we'll get in. I guess that's where I want to go next. Is when a lot of people, when they hear the word culture, they think of the ultimate happy hour, right? They think of party at work every day, casual, total flat organization. Is help me and help all of us understand, is that how you define culture? Is it part of culture, or is culture different than that?
Culture it's so interesting. A lot of the ways people describe culture, I'd call the artifacts or evidence of culture. At its core, it's a feeling, in the sense of, I bet you've walked into a party once and thought, wow, this is going to be a great party. And then maybe you went to a dinner party once and said, I got to get out of here the instant you got there, because you can feel it. And I think that's what culture is at its core, is a feeling. But when it comes to business, it's essentially everything that doesn't have to do with the core business model, which is all communications. So if you think about it, if an alien came down and saw us working, they would think I have the same job as everybody else. They say, I see you on this computer. I see you on phone calls. I see you talking in meetings. And that's what we're all doing is the art of communication. And that's where culture really lies, is what's going on in the communication between people? What are the agreements? What are the expectations? What are the consequences? The consequences especially, these are the things that really guide culture.
Gotcha. And right after the chapter on culture, you go into mission and values.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people hear those two words, right, and they start getting lethargic. Like values, those are the things that really big companies have and don't pay any attention to. So explain how you have a different take on that, and how the mission and values tie to culture. How do all those things connect?
Yeah, the reason why values just tend to stay on the walls, there's no consequences. But when people start getting fired for violations of the values, then you start to have a values-driven culture. If you hire by the values first over skills, if you fire by it over position and skills, et cetera, then you have a culture-driven company. The values become the DNA of that culture. And that's the biggest lever. You know, I disagree with a lot of work going on in culture because it's kind of like, how do we spoil our children? How do we make them happy? How do we make them happy, happy, happy? But to really guide culture, the biggest lever anybody has to pull is tribal, which is what gets you kicked out of the tribe. Right. So that's where culture is really defined by values. If people are not getting fired for violations of the values, then it's not a truly culture-driven company. When I go up to a manager at a company and I ask, what gets somebody fired here? Most of them will only say negligence or harassment.
Right.
You know, they don't even say
really bad.
Maybe some of them will say performance, but rarely does anybody ever say the values. So the values are what's really driving it. And mission plays in because it's your why. Like the Zappos mission is to live and deliver wow, to wow each other inside, to wow customers on the outside. And that never changes. And for that reason, it's really rarely even paid attention to. What's of more value, I think, is vision. Because vision, when done right, is something that can be accomplished ideally within 3 to 5 years, that you can say we did that. Because then everybody comes together to say we're on a real mission by accomplishing this vision. So the interplay between values and vision, I think, is where culture really takes off.
What does vision look like? Describe some visions, maybe that you've seen with different organizations, or help us define that as you see it.
Right. So with Google, at first it was to become the world's #1 search engine. And they did that. And then they moved on. They said, how do we create the world's best email? Gmail really changed the game. We did that, right? With Zappos, it was becoming the biggest shoe store in the world. Check. Okay. Best customer service. American Express rated it #1 by their customers. Check. Right. Okay. Best culture. Okay. Top 10 according to Forbes magazine. So these are things that are goals that are verifiable, that you can say we accomplished it and then build on that for the next goal.
Got it. And so the value, or not the value, but the vision would define success. I think you said 3 to 5 years out, right? Something like that.
Yes.
Okay. And so we set as well, can a leader of a team, let's say I'm not the CEO. I'm not leading the whole organization, but I lead my team. I'm a mid-level manager. Can I create that when it doesn't exist above me?
Yeah. I mean, what's the vision for your team? What's that goal that would be amazing to accomplish for the team? And sometimes the team co-creates that with you. But yeah, you work with your level of authority of where you're at.
Okay. And so these are all elements, right, of what the book is actually even called, which is an organization or a team's culture blueprint, right?
Yes.
Okay. What else is in there?
Geez, I mean, it's everything. It's recruiting, it's training, it's leadership, it's communication, it's conflict resolution. I mean, these are everything that exists within communication, expectations, and agreements. That's within the realm of culture.
So as an organization, most organizations, in my experience, they've spent time on their business plan, right? They've got a strategy. Hopefully, if they're around for more than a minute, they've spent some time developing a strategic plan. Where they don't tend, most organizations don't tend to spend any time is in this space, is in defining a culture blueprint or coming up with it. So the element, I just want to make sure for those that are listening, are thinking, okay, well, how do I execute on this? It's you've got to have the vision, and then and that vision is going to lead to mission and values, and then you start to look at the behaviors, right? Am I getting that right, or what else would you throw into the mix?
I mean, all vision, mission, and values are three very separate things.
Right.
The mission is your why, the vision is your what, the values are your how. Mm-hmm. So those things, and sometimes it takes years to create these. When I actually train people with culture work, first what I talk about is where are the big frustrations? Where are people upset? Or where is something that's really upsetting you? If you're like, all my people are leaving, okay, great, let's address that. If you can't find good talent, let's address that. If you've got a lot of conflict, let's address that. Let's heal the wounds or anything going on before doing that bigger type of work. And because sometimes that big work can overwhelm people. And so we start, the culture hacking process is really about finding those problems. And sometimes like I'm developing essentially a culture MBA. And one of the first things that I have people do is be on time for everything for 2 weeks, on time and early to meetings, on time and early to end meetings, on time to deliver on deadlines. Because what I find is that it's the wax on, wax off of culture. Mm-hmm. Because cultures where leaders come in late means that some people's time is valued above others. But if you value everybody's time equally, it's the one currency that you can value equally because everybody's on different salaries, different skill levels, different genders, races, backgrounds, ages, all those things. The one thing that we can say we are equal with is time. And so that unifies us. And so working with Tony Hsieh at Zappos, not once in all the 10 years I've known him, personally or professionally, has he ever been late for anything. And he's got meetings with Jeff Bezos, and he never says, oh, sorry, the board held me back. Never, ever. If that's happening, he says, I'm out. I've got another meeting. And that's integrity, which is required to execute on the values and the vision. But it's also what most leaders don't realize, that when they roll into meetings late, they're not just signifying disrespect. They're also signaling that they are out of control. And as a pack leader, if you are signaling that you're out of control, we don't trust you.
That's super interesting. So that's one evidence. So you start with this culture MBA, as you speak of it. It starts with the beliefs that you being late create in the team that you lead or the team that you're on, right?
Well, I love that you use the word belief, because I'll interrupt you for a second, because the culture hacking process is about experimenting. So it's not about belief change. It's about a hypothesis, because when we start a program, we're forcing belief change. But if I say to you, Russ, well, how about this? I believe your culture of your company will improve if you're on time for everything. Will you try it for 2 weeks, suspend all belief and disbelief, and just analyze the results once it's done? Don't even think about it till it's done. And that means we can help influence belief change without forcing belief change. We put people on an experiment, and they get to examine the results and decide for themselves if they now believe time really matters.
So why the emphasis on that, Robert? What have you seen that causes you to make that point you just made?
Because what I see is that when leaders say, this is how we're doing things from now on, or they start the new program, or this is Six Sigma or OKRs, or whatever thing that they got in their head of this is how we're going to do it now, especially when people don't have a part in co-creating it, they resist it. Even if they like it, they resist it because, oh crap, they're forcing a belief change and forcing something that they don't know how long it will last. Are you going to give up on this after a month? Is this how it's going to be forever? So it's creating anxiety. But if you contain it as an experiment and you say, look, here's my theory. I think if we do OKRs or if we're on time, that it'll help. We're going to run an experiment. Who wants to participate? We're going to do it for 4 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever it is. And then people relax into it because A, they say, oh, thank God this will be over. And B, thank God I can participate and add my point of view. And then they open up and they willingly participate because they want their point of view included in the final decision. It goes off the rails when people just stuff programs down people's throats.
So before announcing the beliefs you want others to hold, what I'm hearing you say is start working on the experiences, create the different
Exactly.
experience.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Was what now that it's been a few years since Zappos and you've been working with lots of other organizations, what have you discovered? Because I'm sure part of your experience, and May, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I've got to assume that as you tried to help other organizations create a healthier culture, a better culture, that you probably looked at some of it and went, well, some of what's happening at Zappos is special or unique to them. Is that true or not true?
Oh, of course, every culture is unique. Every culture
Okay.
is unique.
So how much of that was I would assume most of the clients you had in those early days at Zappos Insight were saying, help us create a culture like that. And
Some
you
of them
probably had
were,
to
some
say,
of
no,
them
no, no, you
weren't.
don't want a culture like that.
Yeah, because the values can be different, but
Right.
the idea of being values driven, it's essentially, I call it like the health food of the business world. You've got to at least agree and be willing to eat well and exercise to lose that weight, right? And we might disagree. You might be on the keto diet, I might be on a different one, but if you don't agree to eat how you consider healthy and agree to exercise how you consider healthy, whatever that means, it's not going to work. And that's what culture is. And a lot of companies are not willing to agree that culture matters. If they are and understand how values work and program behaviors and reinforcing them, et cetera, then you can have very, very different values in an organization, but they're both culture driven.
Right. Okay, we got a couple minutes left. What do you wish? Let's talk about just a C-suite for a second. So senior leaders of typically larger organizations, but it could be any size. What do you wish they knew about culture that they just don't seem to understand?
Two things. One is that you can't really force anybody to do anything. And because of that, if you let go of that as control, you start working with people rather than telling them what to do.
Mm.
And the other is that transparency works in their favor even when it's negative. So a process I do called open space with companies surfaces all the most important things that are going on, all the most important issues. And that can be scary for executives to see and feel like they're being ganged up on. But you want to know the truth. Otherwise, it's being hidden from you. So if they don't authorize conversations for people to be really, really real, demonstrate they're listening, demonstrate that they take action on what they hear, then all that information is being shared privately, and those people are probably going to leave at some point.
Yeah. What started as Zappos got created? What caused them to create the culture that they did? Where did their thinking or wisdom come from?
It's so funny. The story, as it goes by the legend, is that Tony hired all his friends till he ran out of friends. And then it was the legal department that said, you can't just keep going like this. We need standards to hire by. It can't just be people we like. That's no way to grow a company. And so oddly enough, legal was the one who
Interesting.
really got the inspiration going. And then Good to Great was read, and Tony really got the idea to have it be a values driven company.
Gotcha. It seems like so much of the culture discussion that exists in workplace, and in my opinion, and in my experience, culture is a topic of increasing interest across all organizations, across all industries. And it seems to me that most of the foundation of culture work came out of tech. It came out of, Intel. It came out of Google, Apple, different organizations. Is that do you agree with that, or do you see it differently?
Yes and no. I mean, certain ones like GE have been very culture
True.
focused for a while. I think the reason why you see it with tech is because culture becomes very evident how necessary it is when you're growing quickly and can't talk to people individually. And then you realize, oh crap, we're not running the show. How do we create a system that is? So tech tends to be the fastest growing, so they adopt culture quicker.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you think about Amazon, how much emphasis they put on culture and the employee count, how dramatic that's gone up. I think of Netflix and the culture document that
Yeah.
made so much noise as they scaled, and there's the organization after organization. What have I not asked you about as we wrap up, Robert, that you think is an important, critical aspect for us all to understand around culture?
I think that the solutions are really within, that they're in your people. They're your greatest asset. It's really about hosting those conversations. People hire people like you and me to help facilitate those kind of things, but the wisdom is there in the organization. Nobody knows your organization better than you. You might need some help getting that out of there. But if you can do that, I came at this from a speaker background where I'd be speaking to an audience and everybody else in the audience is in the dark being quiet. And I'm like, this is not a good use of their time. You've got your strongest, smartest assets in the room and they're being quiet. And that's where all the juice lies, in the information and concerns and talents that they have.
To your point, turning the lights on and getting them speaking, right?
Yeah.
Getting them engaged in the process. Yeah,
Right.
I also appreciate the point that you make of, because there is some thinking out on culture that, hey, here's the ultimate culture, go create it. And one of the things I appreciate, the points that you've made in the book as well as in our conversation, is no, what worked at Zappos worked for them, and for a different organization, even potentially in the same industry, the culture is probably going to need to be a little bit different to help them achieve their vision. So
Yeah.
there's some common elements, right, that are a part of every healthy culture. You've touched on some of those, but other aspects have to be unique to the results that you're trying to achieve. So
Right.
good stuff. Hey, Robert, appreciate your time, man, your wisdom. Thanks so much for being generous and sharing it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.